2%. That's how much of your DNA right now inside every cell of your body does not come from modern humans. It comes from a species we didn't even know existed until 2010, a species that walked this planet for hundreds of thousands of years, built tools, survived ice ages, spread from Siberia to Southeast Asia to the Pacific Islands, a species that met your ancestors face to face and left something behind inside them. We have almost no fossils, no complete skeleton, not a single full skull confirmed until 2 years ago. What we have is a finger bone, a few teeth, a fragment of jaw pulled from a cave in Tibet at 14,000 feet above sea level. And yet, from those fragments, we have reconstructed an almost complete genome. We know their face, we know their diet, we know which of their genes are still protecting people alive today. Their name is Denisovans, and this is their story. Here is something worth sitting with before we go any further. The story of human evolution that most of us were taught in school goes like this. Modern humans evolved in Africa, spread across the world, and replaced every other human species they encountered. Clean, linear, final. That story is wrong. What actually happened was messier, stranger, and, depending on how you look at it, far more interesting. Our ancestors didn't just replace the other species they met. In many cases, they had children with them, and some of those children's children, across hundreds of generations, eventually became you. So the questions this video is going to answer are these. Who exactly were the Denisovans? Where did they live, and for how long? What did they look like? How did they meet our ancestors? And what happened when they did? And what did they leave inside us? And why does it still matter right now in 2025? The Altai Mountains of southern Siberia sit at the point where Russia, Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan almost touch each other. It's a remote, cold, ancient landscape, and carved into one of its ridges, at an elevation of roughly 2,300 feet, is a cave called Denisova. Local people have known about this cave for centuries. It's named after an 18th century hermit, Denis, who reportedly lived there. Archaeologists began working the site in the 1980s, finding stone tools and animal bones going back tens of thousands of years. In 2008, they found something different. A small bone fragment, roughly the size of a fingertip, from the pinky finger of a young girl who died somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 years ago. It didn't look remarkable, but the DNA inside it was unlike anything in the scientific record. The team that analyzed the fragment was led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, the same scientist who would go on to win the Nobel Prize in 2022 specifically for this field of work. When Pääbo's team sequenced the mitochondrial DNA from the bone, the results stopped them cold. The sequence was distinct from both modern humans and Neanderthals, the two human species they already knew coexisted in that region and that era. This was something else, a third lineage. Separate, previously unknown. They named it after the cave, Denisovans, and from that single finger bone, smaller than a matchstick, an entirely new chapter of human history began to open. But here's the thing about Denisovans that makes them genuinely unlike any other extinct species we've ever studied. We know almost nothing about what they looked like, and almost everything about their genetics. And it's the genetics that makes this story personal. For years after the discovery, scientists faced an unusual problem. They had one of the most complete ancient genomes ever sequenced, and almost no physical remains to attach it to, a finger bone. 3 teeth, large and robust, unlike modern human teeth. A fragment of jaw found on the Tibetan Plateau in 2019 at an altitude of 10,800 feet. And in 2025, a mandible recovered from the seabed near Taiwan, confirming Denisovans genes reached East Asia. That's nearly the entire physical record of a species that existed for hundreds of thousands of years across an enormous geographic range. But genetics is extraordinarily powerful when you know how to read it. From the Denisovan genome, researchers reconstructed a physical profile. They were large, broader than modern humans. They likely had wide faces, pronounced brow ridges, pronounced skeletal, and a robust skeletal structure adapted for cold, high-altitude environments. Their teeth were so large that when the first molars were recovered, scientists initially assumed they belonged to a cave bear. What we know about their range is staggering. Denisova Cave in Siberia, the Tibetan Plateau, the highest and most oxygen-deprived environment a large primate had ever occupied. the Malay Archipelago, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, possibly Australia. They didn't just survive in these environments. In many cases, they thrived in conditions that would have been physiologically catastrophic for modern humans arriving from Africa. The Tibetan Plateau alone sits at an average elevation of 14,500 feet above sea level. The air there contains roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. Modern humans who move to that altitude without generational adaptation develop altitude sickness. Their bodies struggle to process enough oxygen to function. Tibetans today don't have that problem. And the reason, confirmed by genetics, is a specific gene variant called EPAS1, a mutation that optimizes how the body uses oxygen at high altitude. That gene variant did not evolve in modern humans, it came from Denisovans. When modern humans arrived on the Tibetan Plateau, likely sometime between 30,000 and 40,000 years ago, they met Denisovans who had been living there long enough to have evolved a biological solution to the altitude. They interbred, and the descendants who inherited the Denisovan CPAS, one variant could breathe more efficiently at altitude. Those descendants survived better, had more children, and over thousands of generations, that Denisovan gene spread through the Tibetan population until today, where it is present in nearly 90% of all Tibetans. The highest altitude human population on Earth owes its survival, in part, to a species that no longer exists. But Tibet is only one piece of the map. The more geneticists look, the more they find Denisovan DNA in living people on nearly every continent, which raises a question that took scientists years to fully accept. How many times did our ancestors actually meet them? For a long time, scientists assumed there was one interbreeding event between modern humans and Denisovans. One meeting somewhere in Asia that left a genetic trace in the populations that descended from it. Research published in Nature Genetics in 2024 dismantled that assumption entirely. The data now points to multiple distinct interbreeding events with different Denisovan populations in different places at different times. Not one meeting, several, across an enormous geographic range and tens of thousands of years. Think about what that means. Modern humans left Africa roughly 60,000 years ago. As they spread east across Asia, they encountered Denisovan populations that had already been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, and in multiple locations. In Siberia, in the mountains of Central Asia, in island Southeast Asia, they met, lived alongside each other long enough to have children together, and moved on. The genetic evidence of these encounters is distributed across the modern world in a pattern that tells its own story. People of East Asian descent carry roughly 0.2% Denisovan DNA on average. Aboriginal Australians and Papuans carry between 4 and 6%, the highest proportion of any population, suggesting their ancestors had particularly sustained contact with Denisovan groups in island Southeast Asia. The Aida Manobo people of the Philippines carry the highest confirmed level of Denisovan ancestry of any population on Earth, approximately 5%. And in 2025, a study published in Science confirmed that indigenous Americans, the descendants of people who crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas at least 15,000 years ago, also carry Denisovan DNA, specifically a gene called MUC19, involved in the production of proteins that form the mucosal barriers in the respiratory and digestive systems. The researchers believe this gene helped early Americans adapt to the new diseases, new foods, and new environments they encountered after crossing into an unknown continent. Denisovan DNA didn't just stay in Asia. It crossed the Pacific. It walked into the Americas. It is right now inside millions of living people. Alice. And in August 2025, researchers identified something else the Denisovans left behind, a gene variant linked to neuropsychiatric adaptation, a genetic modification in brain function that modern humans inherited through interbreeding, and that appears to have helped us process and adapt to new cognitive environments. The same interbreeding that built Tibetan lungs and American immune systems may also have shaped the way certain modern human populations think. The Denisovans are gone, but they are woven into the biology of hundreds of millions of living people, in the way they breathe, in the way their immune systems respond, in ways we are still only beginning to understand. So if Denisovans were this widespread, this successful, this deeply interwoven with our own history, why did they disappear? And did they disappear at all? Or did they simply become us? The Denisovans almost certainly did not go extinct in a single event, no asteroid, no sudden catastrophe. The most accurate way to describe what happened is that they were gradually absorbed. As modern humans expanded out of Africa and across Asia, they encountered Denisovan populations that were already thinly distributed across an enormous range. Siberia, the Tibetan Plateau, island Southeast Asia, environments that were cold, remote, and demanding. Modern humans were adaptable in ways that gave them consistent advantages. More complex language, likely, and larger. More connected social networks that allowed for faster cultural transmission. New tools, new strategies, the ability to share solutions across groups. Denisovan populations, already spread thin across difficult terrain, had less room to adapt. Interbreeding continued. But the Denisovan populations themselves shrank generation by generation as their descendants merged into the expanding modern human population. The last confirmed Denisovan presence at the Tibetan cave site of Baishia dates to somewhere around 48,000 years ago. In island Southeast Asia, the timeline is less clear. Some genetic evidence suggests contact as recently as 15,000 years ago. Here is what makes this different from a typical extinction story. The Denisovans didn't vanish completely. They dissolved into us. Their genome, the biological instructions that made them who they were, didn't disappear. Fragments of it survived inside the descendants of every interbreeding event, passed down through thousands of generations, selected for when they were useful, retained when they weren't harmful. In 2025, researchers at PNAS developed a new method for identifying Denisovan fossils using gene regulatory differences, essentially reconstructing what Denisovans looked like from genetic data and then comparing that profile to unidentified fossil skulls. The results confirmed that the Harbin cranium found in northeastern China, a massive skull that had puzzled researchers for years, is almost certainly Denisovan, as is the Dali skull, also from China, dated to roughly 200,000 years ago. Suddenly, the physical record looks different. The Denisovans weren't just a finger bone in a Siberian cave. They were a substantial, physically imposing, geographically widespread human lineage that occupied Asia for at least 200,000 years. 200,000 years. For context, modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. The entire recorded history of human civilization, every war, every empire, every technological revolution, fits inside the last 10,000 of those years. Denisovans were here for 200,000 years. They are gone now. But the question of whether they truly disappeared or whether they became part of something that continued, then a simple ending, and that brings us to the part of this story that stops being ancient history. Because the DNA the Denisovans left inside us isn't just a genetic curiosity. In some cases, it is actively protecting people alive today, and in others, it may be doing something more complicated. The practical consequences of Denisovan DNA in living humans are still being mapped, but what researchers have confirmed so far is already remarkable. The EPAS1 gene in Tibetans, high-altitude oxygen efficiency, confirmed Denisovan origin. Present in nearly 90% of the Tibetan population, the MUC19 gene in indigenous Americans, mucosal immune defense, confirmed Denisovan origin. Present across populations from North to South America, suggesting it arrived with the first people to cross the Bering Land Bridge and spread as those populations grew. Immune system variants in Melanesian and Southeast Asian populations. Several gene regions involved in pathogen response show Denisovan origin, suggesting that interbreeding with local Denisovan populations gave incoming modern humans access to immune adaptations that had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years in those specific environments. In each of these cases, the pattern is the same. Modern humans arrived somewhere new. Denisovans were already there. Interbreeding transferred locally adapted genes into the modern human population, and those genes provided advantages significant enough that natural selection preserved them across thousands of generations. But in August 2025, a study from the Institute of Evolutionary Biology in Barcelona identified something more ambiguous: a Denisovan gene variant. One of the most widespread traces of Denisovan ancestry found in modern humans appears to have shaped neurological function in ways that helped our ancestors adapt to new cognitive environments. The same study found that this variant may also have increased susceptibility to certain neuropsychiatric conditions in modern populations. This is where the story gets genuinely complicated. The Denisovans didn't just give us tools for survival. They gave us genetic material that has had consequences, some beneficial, some potentially costly, that we are still living with now. The ancient encounters between our ancestors and theirs didn't end when the last Denisovan died. They are still unfolding in laboratories and in living bodies every day, which leaves one final question. A question that isn't really about genetics or fossils at all. It's about what we mean when we say the word human, and whether that word was ever as simple as we thought. For most of human history, we believed we were alone, not alone in the universe. That question was always open. Alone on Earth. The only thinking, tool-making, culture-building species that had ever existed. The last 2 decades of paleogenomics have quietly dismantled that belief. Modern humans interbred with Neanderthals, with Denisovans, with at least one other archaic population in Africa whose identity we still haven't confirmed. The human family tree is not a clean line from primitive to modern. It is a tangled network of meetings, separations, and mergings that played out across hundreds of thousands of years. On every continent, we are not a single origin story. We are the result of many. The Denisovans are a particularly striking case because of how little physical evidence they left and how much genetic evidence they left. We cannot point to a complete Denisovan skeleton in a museum. We cannot look at a reconstruction and say with absolute certainty, that is what they looked like. The physical record is still almost empty, but we can point to a Tibetan shepherd at 14,000 feet above sea level, breathing easily in air that would leave most people gasping, and say, part of what makes that possible has been in this family for 50,000 years. It didn't come from us, it came from them. That's not a metaphor. That's genetics. That's measurable. That's real, and it changes something about the way the story ends. The Denisovans didn't survive as a species, but they didn't disappear without a trace either. They left something durable. They left something durable, written into the biology of millions of living people, distributed across half the globe, still doing work that matters. In 2010, a team of scientists in Leipzig opened a small bone fragment from a Siberian cave and found a genome that didn't match anything in their database. 15 years later, we know that genome well enough to identify their faces in fossil skulls, trace their migrations across Asia and into the Pacific, and map the specific genes they contributed to populations living today on 6 continents. From a fingertip, science does not always move in dramatic leaps. Sometimes it moves the way ancient humans moved across a continent. Slowly, carefully, one small discovery at a time, each one opening a path that wasn't visible before. The Denisovans walked this planet for 200,000 years. They met our ancestors. They had children with them. They disappeared. And somewhere in that story, in the cold air of the Altai Mountains, in the thin oxygen of the Tibetan Plateau, in the genetic record of people who have never heard the word Denisovan, they are still here.